any of us could go to jail. That's the reality on the sovereign citizen movement. And it's hard to think of any other ideology where 4 police have been killed and at least several injured as a result of a set of common beliefs. I can't think of another example in Australian recent history where that's occurred. We really are dealing with a dangerous edge. There weren't many child pornography offenders who left my court without getting really long jail sentences because of my abhorrence for the crime. The reaction for me of having to deal with that nest of cases was really horrific. I couldn't get the images out of my head.
Welcome back to part 2 of my chat with retired Magistrate David Heilpern. Now, if you listened to part 1, you would have found David is probably not the type of person who you would think occupied a magistrate's position for over 20 years. In part 2, David told me about the time his family was relocated to a safe house over concerns of retribution from a man who appeared at his court. We get his surprising views on drug legislation. And we also talked about the emotional and mental impact of someone in a judicial position. I think this is something most of us had not considered, but David really opened up about it. We also talked about sovereign citizens and how AI might change the face of our legal system. It was a great chat. David, welcome back to part 2 of I Catch Killers.
Thanks.
Thanks. That's a bit underwhelming.
Thanks. All right. Well, sorry. Well, I enjoyed the first half, so I hope the second half is as good.
Great. Local courts. We were talking during the break that you see all aspects of life, and the good, the bad, the ugly, literally come through the local courts. And you see some humour, and you see some humanity. You see every aspect of life. Any funny things happen to you when you're on the bench?
Look, so many that I'm sure I could bore your audience for days, but I did sentence somebody who refused to stand up, and I said, "Stand up, please," and he didn't. And I said, "Come on, stand up. This is serious." And then I realised he was in a wheelchair. That was not a good look.
That's embarrassing.
But another guy I refused bail to, and as he was being led out of court, very unhappy, he goes to me, "Oh, you fat cunt." And I said to him, "Did you call me fat?" And fortunately, he laughed, I laughed, and we left it at that. But, court is a funny place. It's tense. And so anything that breaks the ice can be really very funny, even though it's not so funny outside court.
Yeah, and there's a certain sharpness and a wit that comes with the type of people in court. And I'm not just talking the legal fraternity there. Some of the defendants that come before the court, some of the comments that they make are quite hilarious.
And, there's language that they don't understand. Like a defence lawyer will often call prosecutor, "Oh, my friend," or "my learned friend," or "my very learned friend." And half the time you see the defendants, and sometimes they jump up and go, "I'm not staying here, you're friends." And you just think, well, what hope is there?
Yeah, well, I think in that environment you've got to be able to laugh where you can. It's a little bit hard when you're sitting there as a magistrate. It's easier when you're sitting in at the back of the court. But
and it's even worse when everyone in front of you starts laughing, and you've got to keep a straight face. Yeah. You just learn to be a good actor.
And I also, and No, I don't want you to acknowledge this. I can say it from my position. When I'm sitting in the gallery, some court matters can be very dry and very long, and it might be after lunch and it's been a long day, and you start to nod off, or your mind drifts somewhere else. There's a lot of concentration that's required as a magistrate, and I'm always gobsmacked by. I could have worked on a brief, not just magistrates, with judges as well, for a long time, intricate briefs. It's taken to the court, it's been explained once to the person sitting on the bench, and they seem to grasp the concept. There's a real skill to be able to pick up what's important.
Hard as it is to believe, I actually found it quite a relief, because the vast majority of judging is actually listening.
Yeah.
And you do get better at it over time. There's very little, after 10 or 15 or 20 years, there's not that much that's new that you haven't seen before and that you can't pick up pretty quickly. But good lawyers make for good cases. And, good lawyers are never boring. They may be thorough, but they're always explaining things in short bites that you can comprehend and that really give a good grasp on the case. And that's why if you've got really excellent lawyers and prosecutors in front of you, then cases run smoothly.
Yeah, it makes sense. Did you find that your skills improved, like your skills, your experience and that? Did you think you're a better magistrate towards the latter part of your career, or when you've got like over a decade of experience? Was it a job that you continually learn on?
Absolutely. Every day was a learning experience. And I think those who stop learning stop being good at what they're doing. And I'm sure you found that in policing too, and probably in podcast making, or me now being back at the university. Every day's a learning experience. But certainly I think the other thing is that what I got much better at was recognising that people weren't, with some exceptions, people weren't generally good or bad. Their behaviour was good or bad. And once I drew that distinction, which took quite a few years to get to, it really started to dawn on me that we're dealing with whole humans, some of whom are behaving badly, but that doesn't make them bad people. And keeping that in, and you could see that both in victims and perpetrators, in witnesses, in police, and it really helped me. But I did get better at it, I think, over time. Certainly I was calmer.
Yeah, I would imagine that you're confident and you've seen something like this before. You know how to deal with it. What you said about someone does something bad doesn't make them a bad person. I work very closely with Dr. Sarah Yule, a forensic psychologist in homicide. And I valued her opinion on some really interesting, tough cases, and she was great to work with because she'd be looking at things from a slightly different perspective than looking through it from the police lens. But she was always at pains saying to me, Gary, just because someone's done something bad doesn't make them a bad person. And I've really come to accept that, as you found out, that we all make mistakes in life, and it's what you've done before then, what you do after it, that doesn't sort of define you. And I think it's a good thing to hang on to when you, especially in your role, when you're judging people, to be able to see that people are not necessarily bad. They've made a mistake, as we all do at some stage in our life.
And as part of sentencing, I would say that. I would say, clearly, from reading all the submissions, your family care and love for you, as do many members of the community who have written on your behalf. On the other hand, what you've done is behaviour that's completely unacceptable in our community, and you have to be punished for it, both for you and for all of society and for the victims. But people would, if you approach people like that, for a judicial officer to say to someone you're a bad person and you're evil, it takes away, it robs them of an ability to reform and rehabilitate. I think, or it makes it much harder for them. Of course, there's some exceptions, and I did deal with some people who I would describe as really pathologically evil. Not many, but some. Did you come across some like that as well?
Yeah, most definitely. There's some people that are in jail for the rest of their lives that I was involved in, and I'm more than happy. I know the evil side of those people, and you're not going to change them. But there are other people, and people thought, as a homicide detective, like everyone that you locked up must have been a terrible human being. No, yes, done a terrible thing, and there's, in the scale of things, there's not much worse than murder. But some of the people have made a mistake, a huge mistake, and the consequences have been devastating, but doesn't make them that evil person. There is pure evil. That's my take on it. Other people might have differing opinions, but I think it would be supported with research. There's some people that are just inherently evil, and society does need to be protected from them.
I absolutely. I dealt with one case, and when it went to the district court, he got 48 years for what he did to his daughters. And I'm glad I'm glad he's behind bars until after his death, for sure.
Well, I'm assuming there that it must be child sexual abuse, and
Indeed.
the thing that about that offence that separates it from a lot of others is that children should be protected. There is no mitigating circumstances for a child to be sexually assaulted. And also the level of planning and the re-offending and the ongoing offending. It's not like a one-punch situation out the side of the local club in an argument. This is people that have deliberately decided to do this and then do it again and again. And I
think there's a cost in the criminal justice system. And of course, I'm not taking away from the harm to the victims and the victims' family, but the investigating police, the magistrates and judges, the jurors, the witnesses. For everyone, it's an incredibly gruelling experience. It's no, at least in homicide, it's they're either dead or they're not.
I know what you're saying. Yeah,
and that whole process is incredibly damaging for people. I'm sure we've all seen it in our careers. People who are so harmed not by their involvement in those cases.
Yeah, and there's pressure on homicide when leading investigations, and on the rare occasion that you're looking for a serial killer or a contract killer, there's consequences if you don't bring that person to justice. But the pressure on the investigators in sex crimes, and especially child protection police, you get a report of that, and if I don't move on this straight away, maybe the child's going to be assaulted again. There's a lot of pressure there. It brings me. I'm jumping forward, but we can go back to what we're talking about. You wrote a paper on lifting the judicial veil, vicarious trauma, PTSD, and the judiciary. A personal story. I brought some quotes out there because we're talking about the impact of child sexual abuse, and this is an extract from your experience. I'll read it out and I'll get you to comment on it. About 12 years ago, I was sitting in a series of cases involving child pornography in Bateman's Bay. In those days, it was necessary for the courts to view the pictures and the videos to determine the seriousness of the charges. Fortunately, that is far less often today due to computer classification. As is regular the case, the charges include thousands and sometimes tens of thousands of images and hundreds of videos. I'll not re-traumatise all of us or re-victimise the victims by describing the images. That's pretty heavy, and I think from there you read on a quote by the Chief Magistrate in Police versus Power, who describes what you described there. To see the pale death of innocence and the trust in the eyes of so many young children is to bemoan the capacity of some members of the human race to descend into the dark and depraved side of the human condition. I pulled both those quotes out because I thought that at some point in time we would talk about that. But that is really what we're talking about, the heaviness of what you see.
Absolutely, and let's keep in mind who Power was. It was Patrick Power, who was the Deputy DPP for the state of New South Wales, who was charged with possession of that child pornography. He was working as the Deputy DPP of New South Wales, and his computer needed some repairs. He sent it in and they discovered a cache of child pornography material there. They then conducted an investigation, obviously searched his home and the like, and found more. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to a term of imprisonment, of several years' imprisonment, and obviously that was the end of his career.
Right.
That was the case that I was quoting from, which, is extraordinary for a whole set of other reasons that we could talk about.
Well, I didn't pick it up on. He prosecuted a murder trial I was involved in. I knew him well, and I was disgusted and shocked when I heard of what happened there. So.
The reaction for me of having to deal with that nest of cases was really horrific. I couldn't get the images out of my head. And as a result, I really went through a very difficult mental time. And again, there's police who have to classify this every day. And of course, these are real children who are being filmed. So I don't want to take away for a moment the horror of the victims, but the price of that, of needing to deal with that material for me was really high. I found it very difficult to sleep. I had nightmares with those recurring images, and it became very difficult for me to do my job. I'm not ashamed of that at all. In fact, you'd think it's a sign of humanity that you can't cope with that sort of stuff. And clearly, I thought I was terrifically resilient, and the first few cases I didn't affect me, but it's a bit like a sponge, and over time that sponge got full. And, I realised that I had choices. I could either stop doing cases like that or leave or get some help.
Yeah. And when you were still, as the magistrate, you've got help? You got professional help there?
I did. I phoned the Chief Magistrate and said, I'm not coping with these cases. I explained what was happening to me, and I was so pleased that my colleagues, I spoke to them and they said, well, you just don't do those cases for a while, we'll swap.
Yeah.
And I spent 12, 18 months not doing those cases, getting some professional help, getting some therapy and talk therapy about it, and it really helped. And coincidentally, during that time, a lot of the computer classification came in, and rarely after that did I need to certainly not look at the same numbers of pictures. But, I think it's the price. One of the prices that people don't talk about or even think about of doing that kind of work is that it can have a really significant impact deep down.
It can take a toll, but the fact that you put your hand up and addressed it and then could move forward from it, I think a lot of people, and I'm talking more so with police because I understand that world more, a lot of people don't put their hand up until it's too late. And, if they just acknowledge, okay, let me step away from this a little bit. I need a break from this type of work. With the computer,
in the last few years, we've had 2 magistrates in Victoria kill themselves and 1 family court judge in Queensland kill himself. So, there's, and of course we know about the rates of police suicide and suicide in the legal profession. And is it any wonder when you're dealing with that kind of pressure and that kind of crime?
It is a dark world, and as we talked about in part 1, you are isolated as a magistrate. Like even in policing, we see some horrific things, but you could share it with the team because invariably there's people that have experienced it. As a magistrate, you sit there on your own and confronted with all this. When you talk,
and you're meant to be above it all. You're meant to be, superhuman, impartial, and not affected by it. Yeah.
Well, I think it says a lot because you would have heard it, and we all hear it with the shock jocks and the headlines in the paper about judges. If this happened to their loved one, they'd give the person a harder sentence. I think sitting down, having a chat with you, and giving it the exposure to our audience and listeners, allow them to understand that there is a human sitting there. Quite often you're just this caricature that's sitting on the bench, and we don't think about that you've got emotions. You're just the magistrate or the judge. So I think it's good that we talk about it, and there is an impact.
Yeah, and you realise that that there's discretion. I mean, when you're sentencing someone, you've got discretion. There's from the very minor penalties to the maximum penalties. Yeah. And where you drop that line, of course, is to do with precedent and what high courts have said and what the lawyers say before you and point out what's an appropriate sentence. But you also carry your own baggage. And there weren't many child pornography offenders who left my court without getting really long jail sentences because of my abhorrence for the crime.
Well, I think, and we had a brief discussion about it the other day, but I was surprised about the amount of people in prison that had been sexually assaulted as children and the trajectory that took them on their life from that point in time. And when we talk about reducing crime and we talked about other ways of preventing crime from happening, I think we need to have a real hard look at child sex offenders and the impact that they have on society, because the amount of people in prison that have been sexually abused as children that might necessitate them going into prison, but it's the way they live their life with a risk, or they might become drug dependent, all sorts of things, because it disrupts their life. We've really got to look at going as hard as we can on it, and I don't think there would be many people that would argue against that.
I think that's true, and I think the other aspect is the harm that's done to children by witnessing domestic violence. Over the years I realised that young people who came before me had a lot of things, differences, but a lot of things in common. And one of the really common features of young criminals, kids who are committing crimes, who were all concerned about increases in crimes, and particularly young people. But one thing they almost all had in common was that they had witnessed crime. They had witnessed violence in their homes.
Yep.
And, there's a price to pay for the kinds of violence that is perpetrated on children or perpetrated around children.
Yeah.
And it's a big price.
That's interesting. I certainly clearly understand what you're saying there, and I'm just processing in my mind. But that environment, those formative years as a child growing up, if you're in a safe environment, it sets you on a pathway that you're given your best chance of making the most of a life. If you've grown up in a violent household with domestic violence going on, I can see the problems that could create. But you actually recognised it and saw that in all the years that you were on the bench and people that were coming before you.
I think I better do some research on it.
Yeah. Well, there you go. There's the next paper. We'll bring you back. How long will you take? And 2
or 3 years. It'll take me a little while.
We'll book you in. Domestic violence. There's a lot of talk about it across the country, not just New South Wales, and how we can. We really need to get a handle on it. And the end result, where partners, invariably female partners, are it's taken to the conclusion where they've been murdered. How did you deal with domestic violence situations in the court? Because in the local court and in the areas that you presided in, I would imagine a lot of your casework would have been AVOs and the domestic violence situations.
Absolutely, and it's not the most glamorous work for police either. And it's frustrating. So often, victims would get into the witness box and I can't remember. I fell over. I was drunk.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened. But one time in Grafton local court, a woman, her partner had been charged with beating her on several occasions, and I think it was about the 4th or 5th time she got in the witness box, and we were all expecting the same again. And I saw the defeated look on the arresting officers' faces, saying, "Here we go." And she said, "He hit me." And we all were just staggered. It took 5 times, 5 lots of great police work, patience, making a safe environment, and eventually she'd had enough. And it was a real lesson to me that there's a power in just bringing people to court. The outcome doesn't matter so much as getting people protected as much as possible.
Yeah.
But it really is, I don't know if there's been an increase in domestic violence or there's just been an increase in the recognition that it's a crime.
The awareness of it and the willingness to report it.
But the fact that the police now are starting to, I think, only now, really take it seriously, as serious as some of the less serious crimes, is a terrific thing. And I think it's a cultural shift that we just need to continue. I recently went to a domestic violence specialist court in Queensland to have a look at how they're operating. Just a really terrific thing where people feel safe, where justice is done. Yeah. Where the emphasis is not so much on, lock them up, but on how we're going to change the behaviour in this family and by this man. Really successful programs. And, I've got a lot of hope for change, but I don't think we can possibly underestimate the seriousness of the problem.
I think part of, and police are more aware of it because we've had some horrific situations where, people looked at it and we've got to have this, get a handle of this type of crime. But I think there's more accountability now. Like, we can't, when you look, and sadly, quite often you see a murder and you look back and there's all these red flags. And we had an expert, a criminologist from overseas, and described it as murder by slow motion, where a domestic situation, there's been a falling out. And I can't remember the percentages, but it was quite frightening that if you've been in a domestic situation and your partner has threatened to kill you, and we're talking a man kill a woman, the likelihood of that occurring, the ridiculous percentage. Like, we've got to acknowledge that domestic violence is a red flag, an indicator that something much worse can happen.
Totally. And, the hardest decisions I think that courts have to make is bail. If people are found guilty or they plead guilty, sentencing is relatively easy, but bail is the first time. And of course, we're all aware that there's situations where there's false allegations. We're aware that people are innocent until they're proven guilty. But if you locked up every man where a threat was alleged, well, the jails, you couldn't do it.
Yeah.
So it's really tough call. And I think every magistrate in Australia, every judge will have released someone on bail who then commits an offence, has refused people bail who end up being found not guilty. It's a net loss game, and you can only do your best.
It's a tough one. I want to throw this out because it's just something that in my simple mind it seems like a simple solution. And it came to me when I was speaking to Hannah Clark's parents that I know you've met, and talking about the lead up to before Hannah and the 3 children were murdered, and the fact that she was living in fear, there was concerns. We talk hypothetically, so it's not Hannah's situation, but hypothetically. Man and woman in a relationship, there's domestic accusations of an assault. The person's perhaps charged on that, AVOs are taken out. If they breach that AVO once, why can't we bring in, I'm talking ankle bracelets, electronic monitoring of people. Now, I've raised it a couple of times and people have said, the costing of it, we haven't got the technology. Well, when we're going through COVID, we knew we knew how a bloke went to 10 different stores to buy a barbecue. We can track people. I raised this with Hannah's parents and said, would you have felt more safe if the offender, if he came within a 5-kilometre radius of Hannah, she would have been notified because she was living in fear? And they said most definitely that would have given her comfort. And if she knew that he was within 5 kilometres of her location, she would take certain action. And then the naysayers say, but they could cut the ankle bracelet off. Well, if they cut the ankle bracelet off, the potential victim gets notified. I see it as a way of a compromise between, as you identified, sending everyone that's in breach to jail because the jails just couldn't deal with it, and protecting the victim. And for the offender, not the offender, the accused, why do I have to walk around with a ankle bracelet on? Well, you were given a chance, you failed in that chance, and this the next alternative, if you breach it again, then you go into custody. Am I looking at things too simplistically?
No, I don't think so at all. And I think it's and it doesn't have to be an ankle bracelet these days.
Yeah.
I mean, we can all find
Your
our
phone.
phones with Find My.
Yeah.
And this technology exists. It's there, and that's where it should belong. I often think the fanciest technology seems to be stuck on offences like major drug crimes and things like that. The Australian Federal Police seem to have every single gizmo known to humanity in investigating importation of drugs. If we put that same effort, technology and money into domestic violence offences, and you're right, the geographic separation of people does two things. Of course, it protects the victim, but it also protects the perpetrator from unfair or unrealistic allegations because we know where they are. And if it's false, it's clearly false. So it's absolutely win-win, and there should be much, much more of it.
And the technology, and I'm speaking out of my area of expertise, but I'm sure the technology is available to set that in place, and I think that will give that. You're right. That will give that separation, and because we really have got to make a difference in it because it's happening too much. There's a quote that you talked about the role of a magistrate, and I think it sort of will get you to discuss it from there. A magistrate cannot stop domestic violence or alcoholism or turn around the economy of dying towns. What we can do is ensure that the law is upheld and that there is humanity and consideration in its application. Do you just want to expand on what was meant there?
Yeah, look, the sense of sitting in rural and regional New South Wales is often a fairly depressing thing because you see these towns that were once buoyant, they're in economic decline. Often all that's left is the ragtag army of original inhabitants or older people and a lot of disaffected young people. They don't have the services, they don't have the medical or mental health or educational services that other places have. But the biggest injustice occurs when people aren't listened to. And I found that the smaller the town and the more, the tougher the regional environment, the more time you took, the better justice was served. People have a story that they want to tell. And, the worst thing I've seen in court when I was a lawyer and since is when magistrates just cut everyone off and just, don't allow people to have their say. Win, lose or draw. If people manage to have their say, they feel that justice has been done, whether they're believed or not. If justice is seen to be done, people will leave court not happy, but not begrudging the entire system. And I think it's really important to show that it takes a bit of time, takes a bit longer. You might get home as early, but in the end, justice is done.
Well, the saying, your day in court, you'll get your day in court. I think that very much reflects what you just said there.
Absolutely. And, you see this particularly, in the magistrates' court, as I said, there's no jury. So you're not only the person who's doing the sentencing, you're the person who's trying to determine the truth in the situation. Yeah. And that often means you believe one person and don't believe the other. But if you explain why you come to that conclusion, that the man really did beat his wife, that she was telling the truth because of the bruises or the immediacy of the complaint or his prior record or whatever, he may not be happy with that decision, but as long as it's a process that is fair and open and he gets a chance to have his say, well, hopefully the resentment will be less. Yeah,
understandable. Now, there was one defendant that you had before you that he wasn't satisfied with the court, which resulted in you having to relocate your family. Do you care to tell us that story? Because it was quite chilling.
That was a family law dispute which had been going on for a while, and this fellow who was ex-army decided that he would go to his ex-wife's house while she was at work and the children were at school, and he got the dog and nail-gunned the dog to the front door. So when the children came home, that's what they were confronted with. He was arrested and I refused him bail because I thought the crime was just so horrendous. That he was a real danger. I mean, anyone, there's this whole psychology, and you would know this better than me from homicide, but harm to animals is a really is a red flag.
Yeah, definitely.
I refused him bail. In their wisdom, the Supreme Court granted him bail, and his response to that, he didn't like me much, was to plant a bomb at the courthouse on the gas tank on a sitting day. So that then led to the police rightly saying, and the sheriff's office and the security apparatus that we get, the protective officers, relocating us to a motel until he was caught. And that's obviously a chilling experience. I'm sure it happens to a lot of people in the community, but it also gives you a taste of what it's like to have to hide.
It's not good. It's not good if you're under threat and your family's under threat, and especially in your red flag, someone that's prepared to commit a crime like nailing the family pet to the front door. Well, that tells me a great deal, and I don't think we need to be psychologists or experts in the field to know that is a dangerous person.
And there's not many magistrates, not many judges who haven't had stalkers, who haven't had threats, and particularly the sovereign citizen movement are very threatening often to judges and magistrates. Desi Freeman sought to, that's the fellow who's on the run, sought to arrest the magistrate who originally found his decision that he didn't like, and then he sought to arrest the Attorney General and others. And obviously there would have been a fear factor, and that fear, as we now know, was well-founded.
It's a worrying concern, or I find it worrying with this. It's an ideology that in past times, a sovereign citizen, we go back 30 years, it'd come up on a show like A Current Affair, someone that's declared that he's seceded from the country, and we'd all have a laugh and think there's nothing in it. My take on it now, we've been doing a little bit on sovereign citizens, and we've had actually documents served on us from the sovereign citizens, and they want us to appear at the court and all that sort of nonsense. But the danger of them now is that it's an ideology that is harmless in isolation, but then they can connect in the social media world where people, they go down a rabbit hole and people are supporting their views, so their radical view is, that's what's get fed back to them. And I see them as a real risk. We had someone in, and I'm not saying sovereign citizen here, but just a lone actor situation, someone firing shots a couple of weeks ago in Sydney and let off something like 50 shots. I see them as a real danger of the future, and sovereign citizens that they're not something that we should laugh at. We've got, as the two police officers down there, there are other links with the police that were killed up in Queensland, that there was an ideology or a link with the ideology of sovereign citizens. Have you had them before your court? Had to preside
I've had
over
them a lot. I certainly had them a lot before my court, particularly in the later years. And, everybody reports there's been an exponential growth in those people appearing before court. And since joining the university, it's been an area of focus of my research and publishing is on the sovereign citizen movement. And it's hard to think of any other ideology where 4 police have been killed and at least several injured as a result of a set of common beliefs. I can't think of another example in Australian recent history where that's occurred. So we really are dealing with a dangerous edge.
Yeah.
And their numbers are growing. And the gobbledygook that they come out with is just so crazy. And when they first appeared before me in court, I just couldn't believe anyone would ever spout such nonsense. And when I say that, I'm not laughing at them.
You're not ridiculing them. You're just saying you're completely wrong.
And they're not ill-educated, a lot of these people. They don't fit within the category of right-wing or left-wing either. And certainly sitting in Lismore, I had a lot of, people who were alternate healers and the like, who really follow sovereign citizenship as well. So there really is a broad spectrum of people involved. And it's extraordinary and it's dangerous, and they honestly believe that the law doesn't apply to them.
Yeah.
And if you think that through logically, that the law doesn't apply to them, of course they engage in risky and dangerous behaviour because they think that it doesn't apply to them. They genuinely believe that. And that's a pretty dangerous starting point from any law enforcement or judicial determination point of view.
Yeah, it is dangerous, and it can have impact, and you see it from your role, and I understand the sort of impact they can have. But also to the uninformed in regards to legal matters, they serve these documents and they throw in a couple of legal things and stamps and that. And I can imagine that being served on a person that isn't educated in that area, and the concern and the confusion that would create just a simple thing like that. You get the document served, or they raise it in court, and you can dismiss it out of hand. But I imagine there's a lot of people that have been impacted upon by them standing over people with the so-called.
It's okay for Scott Morrison and me to be sentenced to jail. They sentenced me to 5 years jail. They sentenced him to 10. I thought the worst thing could be is if we had to have a cell together. But
that would be unfair.
It wouldn't have been a lot of fun for either of us, I'm sure. But you have to appeal. But I think you're right. There's the Ngari court that they've set up in Gympie, which purports to be a family court, and which is actually making orders for the return of children, where the family court has determined the children are with person X. In the leading case, it's a male, the father, and the mother, who is the sovereign citizen, has got orders that she's serving on all sorts of agencies and places, saying that she actually has custody. there's an inherent danger in that.
Sovereign citizens, how can we reduce the movement or the impact of the movement? Have you got any thoughts on that?
I have. Firstly, I think when people come to court and start expressing sovereign citizen views, I think we should give them an option, just like we do with anger management, just like we do with drug and alcohol counselling, just like we do with gambling. And that is some sort of program, at least a pilot, a program where you try and debunk a lot of these beliefs, explain to them that they won't hold up in court and seek to change their behaviour. I've had success with that on a one-to-one level, and I think it could work on scale. We haven't done it yet, but I think it's worth exploring. The second aspect is that there is people making money out of the sovereign citizen movement. There are a lot of subscription services where you subscribe, and these people will get you out of your speeding fine if you just follow this script and just write these letters and just put your names in capitals and say you're a traveller, not a driver, and etc. The authorities really need to crack down on these agencies of profit because behind this movement there are people who are making a lot of money, and if you go for them, like the drug trade, like a lot of crime, then if you cut the head off the snake, the rest of it really doesn't know what it's doing.
Yeah, it's a difficult area. And talking danger, you mentioned like family law court and the bomb that was placed, but we had the family law court judges, and that was I think it was even before my career, but it started in the police. But I remember working on it and very much aware of the recent charging of or conviction of the person for it. That's horrific. That's where societies, we can all complain about, the courts they made the wrong decision. But when you start to get people, putting bombs in judges' homes and people being murdered, that's horrific.
I think it really is, and I think also we should be grateful that we've got such an independent judiciary. I know that means sometimes decisions are made that people don't like, too soft, too hard, whatever. But in my
David,
time,
David, I'm not talking about my personal case here.
No, I'm not either. But look at the situation in America now, where all judges are effectively political appointments, and there's no break on the excesses of government or the excesses of enforcement agencies, and no one wants to live in a society like that. When I was a magistrate, I saw in that time, literally hundreds of magistrates come and go. And whether they were appointed because they were prosecutors or ex-defence lawyers or government officials, all of them genuinely sought to apply the law according to legal standards, not according to, one favouring one party or another. And we should be so grateful we've got that independent judiciary.
I think it's crucial, the separation of powers between politics, the courts, the police. We need those separation of powers, and if they all become too aligned, I think that's where problems are made, and it leans one way or the other that doesn't do the society justice. It's so important, and I don't like seeing politics get involved in court matters. I'm a big believer in legislation changes if it needed to be changes, but I don't like the knee-jerk reaction where legislation changes because it's become a popular vote winner, and we're going to bring in this law. So.
Yeah, and also, magistrates and judges should be criticised. It's, when the media would criticise me saying, you released a person and then they did a crime, fair cop. I never had a problem with that in the sense that, you can't afford to be reactive in that situation and not cop criticism. But yes, as you say, simply changing the law because of one bad case or one bad decision, it always has implications that no one's happy with in the end, and then you have to go back and it takes time and there's injustice.
The scrutiny court, I'm a big believer in open justice as well, and I've seen it in my career times where I think that's not good that the doors are shut to the media or the public on this one, because sometimes I think there's mistakes made or things that people are not accountable when there's not the public scrutiny. I get the sense through your career you were very much open to the open justice system, even in the way that you talked, and you'd offer opinions on current situations and weren't afraid to voice those opinions.
If I thought the law was being silly, I would certainly say so, but then I would go ahead and apply it as you must. you take an oath, an oath to uphold the laws and usages of the state of New South Wales without fear or favour, affection or ill will.
Yeah.
And what that means is, whatever your personal views, the law is the law. And, I had problems, like we've talked about, with minor possession charges for prohibited drugs. But you've got a lot of discretion there. You don't have to send everyone to jail for it. Indeed, you don't have to convict people for it. And especially first offenders, that's what I would do. But it has to be open, and you have to have a good appeal system, because the scrutiny that's given by the media, whether it be tabloid media or so-called non-tabloid media, the more intellectual approach. I honestly don't think it matters. It's good to have people in court and watching. And I would love it when school kids came in, and the first thing I tell law students is, spend as much time in court as you can. Just become a courtroom junkie. Just watch it. I still am. If I have a case, I practice a little now, and if I have a case that's not going to get on till the afternoon, no better way to spend the day than watch the morning in court.
You can you can certainly learn things from there. So with the as a magistrate, you talked about the drug laws and I think the issues that you had with people that have used, let's say, what's the medical-based cannabis, and then being pulled over. You had a lot of people coming before the courts there with a minuscule amount of cannabis still in their system, and people being charged. What's your take on that situation?
It wasn't so much a problem when cannabis was just an illicit drug, but of course we know now that it's available by prescription, and there's 1 million prescriptions now, in excess of 1 million prescriptions. So what we've got is a lot of people driving around who use THC as their preferred medication prescribed by their doctor. But if they have a detectable level in their system, we're not talking about people being stoned, but just a detectable level, then they're committing an offence and they lose their licence. Now, that when I was sitting as a magistrate, I would have single mums who were getting medication for all sorts of things, be it PTSD, or who were getting THC prescribed by their doctors, or chronic pain, or epilepsy, and they would say, "You can't take away my licence. How am I going to get my kids to school or to sport or to all the other things?" And I would say, "I'm sorry, this is the law," and I just felt that was really wrong, and I spoke out about it. And I still speak out about it. And, the drug summit that we just had in New South Wales with John Brogdon and Carmel Tebbit recognised that. The overwhelming view of the unanimous view, as far as I know, of the drug summit, certainly of the report, was that this law should change. And hopefully we're going to see that this year.
Well, I think it is something that needs to come in, because I've got friends that have got the used medical cannabis, and I see them drive, and it might be a week later, and I'm thinking, I'm no expert, but I'm thinking if you get pulled over, there's a good chance that you'd still have it in your system.
Typically, how people take medicinal cannabis is they would take it after dinner. It would help them sleep. And, of course, the effects of that 8, 10, 12 hours later would be zero. There's no question that they are driving while they're intoxicated or anything. The other aspect to this, of course, is what's their alternative? Do they go on benzodiazepines or Valium or anti-anxiety medication, or do they drink? A residual amount of any other prescription drug doesn't trigger this law. I jokingly said at Parliament House a few weeks ago, I was speaking about this, and I jokingly said, I feel like I need a T-shirt that says "just like any other prescription drug." And that's all people, that's how we should treat it. Just like every other. Imagine if there was a new drug, we'll call it weed, that came in from America that had these benefits. No one would even think about making it an offence to have a detectable level, like with Disprin or alcohol or anything else.
No, well, it's again, this is where I've always been of the belief that the law should evolve to reflect the needs of society and the changes in society. Talking of changes, one thing that I know it caused me concern, what I saw of the effect, and we're still talking drugs, but a completely different drug, ice in the communities, and I would imagine in the communities, even when you're a magistrate, that would have been prevalent. And what was the impact that you saw of the prevalence of ice in the communities?
And the two topics, the drug driving topic and ice, are not unrelated, because For ice, as we all know, it's water soluble, whereas cannabis is fat soluble. So people could use ice on a Friday night if they wanted to go out. It was cheap. They could use it. They could then drive the next day without detection.
Yep.
And it had a shocking impact on the operations of the court. Lismore Courthouse has been there for at least a couple of hundred years, but there'd never been the need for a walled-in, glassed-in or barred dock. That's where prisoners are kept while the court's on. But with ice, people escapes. There was a lot of violence in the court. There was people jumping over the railing and injuring themselves. We had to double the number of sheriffs in court. The impact of ice, people who are craving ice, who are addicted and have been arrested, they lose all sense of logic or sense, and they're extremely strong and extremely violent. And we saw that in the court time after time. It's a really bad drug.
And it's readily available too. That's easy access that people...
It's an absolute tragedy. My students now tell me that, well, if they go out, for a big night, as young people are wont to do, alcohol will cost them, maybe $100.
Yeah.
Cannabis, well, they've got the risks of driving and it smells and whatever.
Yeah.
Ice, $15.
That's a concern.
That is just that's a failure of drug policy.
Yeah.
And it's a failure of our society that the most dangerous drug is the cheapest and most prevalent. That's a really difficult and dangerous situation for those involved. Now, I get the sense that we may have reached the peak of it and we're on the downhill slide. Is that your sense as well?
Yeah, it doesn't. There was a point in time where it was the usage was growing exponentially. It would almost, and you would get the information that's hit a town, and then the dynamics of the town change, and maybe it's plateaued out. But it is so concerning, and the crimes can be very violent when people have been on ice. And towards the latter part of my career in homicide, out at the Tamworth, there was someone that was affected by ice and committed a horrific murder. But I remember speaking to him, and it was chilling. It was like I was talking to a zombie. Like there was no soul behind the eyes, and it was something different. I'd seen all types of people affected by drugs, but there was something not quite right than when I was speaking to this person.
Yeah, and I think the involvement of a whole lot of programs really have proven pretty successful. We have the drug court, which doesn't sit in enough places, but at least it's in Sydney and it's in Dubbo now, and it's in Newcastle. We also have Merit, which is Magistrate's early referral into treatment, which means that drug offenders can be dealt with via a rehabilitation process as opposed to a criminal, a more punishment-based process. So I think the system, always a bit slow, always a bit too late, but still is effectively gearing up to deal with these problems in a much more constructive way than we were dealing with them before. Because, the other scary aspect is the urine samples that are taken from prisons.
Yeah.
Amphetamines are rife in prisons.
Yeah.
So, that's obviously not an answer. I think the other thing that's happened also, for good or for bad, is that cocaine has really taken over to a bigger extent than ice. I'm not saying one drug's better than the other, but I think that the consequences of violence are less.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say without putting ourselves up as experts in the field. But I think I'm not saying anything. I think that the damages from ice, it's far-reaching. There's damages. I've seen people lose track and lose path in cocaine, but it's more of a gradual thing. With ice, I've seen it go from a normal person to a shell of a human being in a very short period of time. You work at the uni with students. What are you doing there? What's your title and what's your role that you're doing now?
I'm the Dean of Law, which means I'm head of the law discipline, which we have, students doing law degrees, students doing paralegal degrees, students doing conveyancing, I'm in a large faculty, which is the Faculty of Business, Law and Arts. So there's compatibility with arts. We have a lot of double degrees. And, it's marvellous for me to be back in an environment where I'm teaching again. It's an absolute delight. And I've got a great crew of really dedicated academics. I guess we pride ourselves on producing great lawyers as opposed to other universities which focus much more on research and on higher degrees. We're a regional law school. We were based in Lismore. Now we're also at the Gold Coast and Coffs Harbour. And, we produce lawyers who go to small firms and practice law, who go to Aboriginal Legal Service, legal aid, government departments. We have some in the larger firms. But I've been living in the country so long that to produce great country lawyers there's a shortage of them. There's not enough lawyers in the country areas.
And what do you think you're saying, making great lawyers? What are the attributes you're looking for, or what's the finished product that comes out after they've got their qualifications? What are you looking at for a good lawyer?
I think there's really only two things. It's actually really simple. The first is you've got to be able to communicate, and you've got to be able to communicate with an incredible range of people, from the judges and magistrates to your colleagues, the other lawyers, to the people on the street, to your staff. You've just got to have a real ability to talk to people and not talk down to people and not complicate things. So the first is communication. And the second thing is you've got to have a love of the law. Yeah. You've got to enjoy researching it, finding out what the latest is, seeing how it's useful for your client or how it fits in better for the society. So if you've got those two factors, then you've got a great lawyer, and an employable one, and one that'll be a benefit to the community. And, we have a lot of police who are studying law because they want to become prosecutors or join the DPP or go into private practice. So the average age of our student is not school leaver age. It's in their late 20s, so people have had a bit of a life.
That's not a bad thing, going into that environment, having life experience. It makes it. I saw it in policing, and I would imagine it's very much similar in law, that they've got.
I remember reading, I can't remember, I think it was the Wood Royal Commission into Police Corruption, said that the older the age you employ the police, the less likely they are to be corruptible. When people were brought into professions at 17 and 18, and they were. Whereas if you've got a trade to fall back on, if all else fails, then you're less likely to be culturally influenced by negative things as opposed to positive things.
David, that's and I haven't heard it put that way, but it's an interesting point. And on reflection, I think it's very, very true that if we had what was called cadets, where you could basically go straight from school into the police, that's the only culture you knew outside of school. I worked in the building industry and got an electrical trade for 6 years before I joined the police, and I think that was the best thing that happened to me. And I was also I was major crime before the Royal Commission and all that, so I was round that time. But I had the life experience to navigate my way through that, in that, I could stand up for myself. I could sense this person wasn't quite right. I didn't buy into the police, the whole culture. And so I think that's a good idea, that having that life experience before partaking on a profession that once you're in there, it gets you holus bolus and you get caught up in the whole thing. And a lawyer I always laugh when police are complaining how tough the job is, and I think, spend a day on the jackhammer. And in the hot sun, spend a day on the jackhammer and tell me what we're doing here at the crime scene is hard. So I wanted to ask you this because I'm falling. We talked about sovereign citizens falling down rabbit holes. I'm falling down the rabbit hole of AI at the moment. I had to do a talk with a lady about crime and AI. The future of training lawyers, I'm thinking, the access that you've got to material, case law, which was always a part of a good lawyer, being able to research the cases and get the material. Where do you see the future of law with the advent of AI?
Well, in terms of teaching law, I think we've got to come pretty quickly to the conclusion that the bedrock method of assessment, which was assignments, is gone. We can catch some now. We'll be able to catch less in 5 years. and less 5 years later. So if you can't test people by writing assignments, how do you test them? Well, the other is exams. Well, then you're going to have closed book exams. Can people have their computers there? Because if they can, then AI will just take over. Are you going to go back to closed book handwritten exams? Well, what does that test? It just tests memory. And we're not testing whether people are, those skills that I said before, a love and passion for the law and the ability to communicate. So I guess I see the law school of the future with AI as being what I call, without being derogatory at all, the plumber model, where you go out into the field 4 days a week, you're working with other lawyers or judges or police or anyone within the justice system, and a day a week you come back and you learn your theory, rather than what we're doing now, which is just trying to ram it into 3 years or 4 years into a degree, and it's all intellectual without very much going out into the field. And, you know, I think that model, which ironically is what they used to call article clerks, it's how people used to go to uni. That model of learning, I think, is what we're going to have. And that's not a model that will come to any surprise for people, say, in the medical profession or indeed teaching as well. You know, they do a lot of their learning in the field. Well, I think that's the way law has to move. As for AI and the practice of law, I can see situations where, for example, in sentencing, where all the factors are fed into AI, you know, just a drink drive charge, the bread and butter of the local court, tens of thousands of matters every year. Well, do they really need individual assessment by a judge, or should it instead be fed into a big mega computer and a proposed penalty comes out, taking into account all the factors that are fed in, and if you don't like that penalty, you can go to the court and say, well, this is why it should be different. Similarly, you know, the preparation of documents, you know, the Chief Justice of New South Wales has said we're not going to use AI in affidavits. And, well, really what you're inviting there is people to do it and then cover it up. And that's even worse.
I wondered about that because that was a big part of policing, like affidavits. And I'm thinking, what's happening? Because I've been out of the police 5 years. What's happening now? Because that was to type up an affidavit to get a Supreme Court warrant at 2 o'clock in the morning. It took skill, and that was really the skill that you developed as a detective. You got renowned for your skills to be able to type up an affidavit, and it was a particular skill, drawing all the evidence together succinctly that's going to pass the test with a Supreme Court judge. And I'm thinking at 2 o'clock in the morning with AI available, what's happening?
Exactly. And look, you know, we set exams or assignments now which says, here's the problem. This is what AI says. Criticise this response.
Okay.
So, you know,
that's interesting.
That's one way that you can get around it. Also, you know, in criminal law now, we say to people, don't do an assignment on bail or sentencing. You have to do a bail application and you have to do a sentencing. And so we do mock courts for assessment rather than an exam or an assignment. So, look, you can do all that. But then I think to myself, well, if you really want people to learn criminal law, why aren't they working with legal aid or police prosecutions for 6 months? That'd learn them.
Yeah, I like the way you're thinking, and until you raised it, I hadn't given it much thought on how to prepare for the future like that. But I suppose even as your career as a magistrate, you're an agent of change and pushing against some of the more accepted practices of offensive behaviour and different things. The future, the future of law. Do you still see I suppose I'm stumbling on the question. I should check AI and make it more succinct. Would you? Don't worry, I mightn't be here in 12 months, so it just might be AI.
Maybe it isn't you.
Well, exactly. We're not in the same room. We're on screen, so it could be.
That's right.
Do you think it's a career that you advise people to go into, and what are the rewards for pursuing a career in law?
One of the joys and pleasures of having been an academic and then a judicial officer is you get to see your students appearing in front of you. And it was just wonderful. Occasionally they'd bring books you'd written and put them on the bar table and think they were being very smart. But there is an enormous satisfaction, I think, in the practice of law. And the other thing is law degrees are really the new arts degree. There are no arts degrees at many universities now, and people do law as their base degree because it's such a great starting point. You know, if you didn't know what you wanted to do, you used to do an arts degree. Now I think, well, why wouldn't you do law?
Serves you well.
I guess a lot of people think to themselves, well, you know, I'm going to make more money as a plumber, and you might well.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to have better school holidays if I become a teacher, and you may well. But to me, at least, the satisfaction, and seeing it in my students, the satisfaction in learning the law and applying it and trying to change the world to make it a better place is enormously satisfying. So I would always encourage people to practice or to study law. And, you know, if you don't like it, you'll soon know and you can go and do something else.
Yeah. Well, I get the sense that it served you well. You seem like you still have the joy for life and a great future ahead of you. I'd like to thank you for coming on I Catch Killers. You're the second magistrate, but we had Hugh Dillon that I know you know, the coroner on there before. But I think you've given a fascinating insight because like we talked about, a lot of people don't know who the person is sitting on the bench. I spent a lot of time sitting in the courts wondering what's going on in that person's mind, but you've given us a bit of insight into that. I think, and I mean this sincerely too, I'd like to thank you for the service that you brought to the communities, because someone that's got some humanity and empathy in them sitting in a position of power like you have as a magistrate is so important. And I think you really make potentially make a difference. The fact you understand crime when these people are saying, yeah, what would they know? It's never happened to them. You understand the impact it has, and I think that's so important. So congratulations on an impressive career and a future educating lawyers in the right direction.
Thanks so much. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. And obviously our shared experience in these things makes for a great base of knowledge. I've certainly learnt things too. So it's been great. And I'll come back in a few years once I've done that research on children being victims of crime, then committing crimes.
Okay,
we'll talk about that.
We'll book the studio. I'll just check the calendar and we'll get that sorted out. But thanks very much and all the best, David, sincerely.
Thanks very much.